I have more to talk about this than you're going to have time for the podcast.
Fresh expressions, new expressions. Golly, it just has to be something that we're just intentional about.
There's nothing magical about butts and bucks, though. They track who is present, not who is transformed.
There are people in our community that don't know that they're beloved and probably never will in the way that we do church, and that's why we do Fresh Expressions.
This is Pod Strangely Warmed, a place where we tell the good Methodist story, where we have conversations that invite followers of Jesus to seek after that loving, just, and free world that God imagines for us all, and have a little fun along the way. Hi, and welcome back to Pod Strangely Warmed. I'm Daniel Hawkins, your host, and today we continue our conversation on fresh expressions in the life of the United Methodist Church, or as Reverend Dr. Michael Beck coined for us last week, OG Methodism returned. And so we are thankful, Michael, to have you back, and Al to have you back on this week's conversation as we move from kind of the 30,000 foot of Fresh Expressions 101 to this, what does it look like today in the life of where the inherited church meets the emerging church, and this kind of blended ecosystem or ecology kind of comes into being. At the end of the last episode, Michael, you mentioned that as a part of your weekly pastoral work, you have 3 services on a Sunday morning and this community of fresh expressions of Christianity. My brain exploded a little bit as I thought about my week. And again, you have the most full calendar of anybody I know. Tell me a little bit about how your church kind of came into this place of we've got Sunday morning standards and a kind of a blended ecology.
Yeah, so if I can just kind of ground us in Scripture to begin. Paul gives us a metaphor in Romans 11 about the church in general, and gives us this really cool kind of organic tree imagery. And it's a tree that has deep roots and wild branches. And for him, he's describing how Messiah Jesus has fulfilled the prophets, the matriarchs, the patriarchs, the Torah, but there's these weird Gentile communities happening in Antioch and elsewhere that are very different. So he calls those the wild branches, right? But God is somehow grafting together into the root system these new things, these new communities, and blending those things together. Now, if you think historically, if that wouldn't have happened, what we would have today, because where did the church actually flourish and thrive and then expand all over the world? There's always been that rooted piece of it, but the Gentile communities that went out to the 7 churches of Asia Minor and just then kind of all over the world. So what does that look like today in an inherited model where we kind of have the root stock figured out, like the root system, but then how do we do the wild branches thing? What does that look like practically in the local church? And so a lot of that requires kind of renegotiating the social contract. And if I could try to illustrate with story kind of like what it can look like. So I came to St. Mark's in the middle of the pandemic. It's the church that baptized me as a baby. I was an orphan, and it was the church that was kind of my orphanage. I was born addicted. These folks kind of, in a way, made me who I am. And so when my bishop called in the middle of the pandemic and said, hey, can you go back to St. Mark? My wife and I are co-pastors. My wife, Jill, and we were doing Wildwood together. She's still at Wildwood because we have this lay empowerment culture that the conference really doesn't know what to do with fully. So we come to St. Mark's, and there's Miss Shirley Harville, who was playing the organ in my infant baptism. She's still playing the organ today. And I go over and mess with her while she was playing, like I did when I was a little boy. So we're keeping the tradition alive. But I have 8 people, right, in a congregation chronologically mature, right? So, up in the age cohort range. But because we had this shared history and relationship, there was some trust that was already built there. And all of these things happen at the speed of trust. Fresh expressions, building community, inherited, things can only happen at the level of the deepening of the trust. So, but at Wildwood, it took us like 12 years to start an ecosystem of fresh expressions. We had like 8 of them all over the place. And then the inherited church starts to come back alive in new ways. And we started a new service to accommodate those people that were coming through the fresh expressions. at St. Mark's, we could do things really quickly because that inherited group, they know me and they trust me, and they were just like, pastors, help us see what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So the first thing we started was a community listening session. We prayer walked the streets. We went out and knocked on doors. We actually invited our neighbors, and not in a weird way of like, hey, but just saying, hey, we're from the church down the road, and we just want you to know it's your church, and anything that we can do to help, and having those kind of conversations. People could literally throw a rock and hit the church and had no idea that it was there or what it was.
Yeah.
So we did that listening session. We found food insecurity. Only a couple people showed up. Huge bummer. We're discouraged. But one of the people that showed up was our person of peace. Her name's Betty Jefferson. And she's a black female prophetess, church planter who goes into like some of the toughest soil in our community and does like street church and all these things. And she was like, well, I do this food distribution thing, and I put it out on Facebook, and we meet in a parking lot, and I get a truck of food and distribute to the community. And I'm planning a church, but I have no building. And so we were like, well, guess what? We have a building, and we have all these resources. So how do we partner together? So remember that co-creation thing you and I were talking about in the last episode. Yeah. So she's like, well, this is what I need. So we created with her this thing called a dinner church. So my little faithful group of 8 folks, I was like, hey, we're going to do this thing called a dinner church where we're going to serve a meal to the community. So we start this drive-through community dinner. People are coming through by hundreds to come and get the food distribution. So we're making connections with them. They're like, so Pastor, you want us to do a free meal every week? Did you notice that we're like 80 and we're not? Well, no.
It's a reasonable question. In their defense, it's a reasonable question.
It's a reasonable question.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, let's do it like this. What if George and Carol, you cook one week, Jill and I will cook one week, then, Bob and Amy will cook one week. Why don't we share that load? And we'll invite the community from the beginning. Let's just try it for 3 months and see what happens. It doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be till Jesus comes back.
Right.
So we start this little experiment community dinner that happens between the 5:30 AA meeting and the 8 o'clock NA meeting at our church. Now that community dinner has about 100 to 120 people every week. We started right off the bat with my old faithful folks just kind of cooking, but asking the community, hey, does anybody have the spiritual gift of cooking? Because we're ready in the kitchen for you.
Right.
Hey, we're going to do a little thing called a God Talk tonight. We eased into that, but does anybody want to do that next week? Do you have a story of some time that God was active in your life or this week? Hey, we know service work keeps us sober, so anybody want to stay and help clean up, be part of that team? So from the very beginning, we tried to not do ministry to or for, but with, and to give people buy-in and ways to connect to it. So now some of my faithful folks, sadly, many of them have gone on to be with Jesus, but the ones who still come and are present, they just get to come sit at the table and learn people's stories. They don't have to do anything. The community's running it. Yeah. People in the community are doing every aspect of it. And I had to do some training with them like, hey, don't try to invite people to church. Don't just serve and then sit back with your apron and kind of,
Yeah, because that temptation is real.
It's
right?
real.
And that temptation is often companioned with like I don't want to ask anybody to do anything because if I ask them, they might run off. Does that make sense? Rather than that empowerment of we're going to do this together and we need each other in this moment.
Yeah. And had to do some like real skill, like just listen, ask questions, really get curious about people's lives and make it about that, not about. So that kind of happened. So now we have church in a rehab that happens on Monday nights called Higher Power Hour. We have Tattoo Parlor Church. We have Burritos and Bibles, which is church in the Tijuana Flats. We have a thing called Recovery Church. All of those little things are happening, and really what I needed most from that inherited group was like permission and the ability to renegotiate that social contract. And Al and I were talking about this earlier, but the way that I try to do that is to celebrate them in their faithfulness. The people who come to our vintage worship service at 11 o'clock, which is essentially the same as it was when I was baptized as a baby.
Okay, yeah.
When I was messing with Shirley on the organ, still doing that. But the fresh worship is like a collection space for all the people we connect with in the fresh expressions. And it's more like what they would experience in a fresh expression. Okay. But I stand there on Sunday morning in my vintage worship and say, thank you for your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. Because your faithfulness here enabled this stuff to happen this week at Tattoo Parlor Church. Let me show you this picture of the 2 people that were baptized this week.
Okay.
So now they feel connected to it. They get excited about it.
Yeah.
In the beginning, they're like, Tattoo Parlor Church, what are we talking about here? Now they're like, we're that church that's the Tattoo Parlor Church. You know, there's a degree of like pride, and that's just changed the whole ecosystem of the church now. So I think the key things of the blended ecology, and Al, you weigh in on this, is like caring for the existing thing, cultivating a healthy habitat where people are growing in Jesus, but not doing only that, but balancing that with putting about as much time and energy we put into the inherited as we do into the emerging and the fresh expressions. So I literally try to get my team to think about like a 50-50 scenario.
Okay.
Whatever time you give to the inherited church, to your church, if it's 2 hours or 5 hours or 1 hour, can you split that up with community engagement, doing stuff out in the fresh expression kind of thing, with, you know, singing in the choir or, you know, committee meetings or whatever, kind of balance that out. And that requires a renegotiation of the social contract.
Yeah.
Where I've seen this fail is when churches want to get stuck in this model of professional preacher does all the stuff, performs. We get the religious goods and services that the professional pastor produces. We consume that. And we pay you to basically be our spiritual butler. That won't work in this scenario. So you have to say, hey, here's how I'm going to use my time. I'll be here on Sundays. We'll do church. We'll do all this. I'll be in the office when you need me for these things. Yeah. But the other part of my time is I'm sitting in that burrito shop on Monday nights having conversation about Jesus, eating burritos with people. Right. And both of those things are my work for the church. And you should come and join me and every lay person in the church. What if you thought about your own life in this way? So now we have a team of lay preachers. So we have 7 lay preachers. That we do kind of an in-house training. We create the sermon series together. We have a care shepherd team that does that ministry of visitation and doing all of that. So every aspect of the ministry has to be team-based, just like we go about a fresh expression, like who's our person of peace, what's the team, how do we start that? The inherited church has to run in that way too. And that can be a struggle for people because a lot of our inherited folks, they're like, I want my preacher Sunday morning. Right. To put on his bathrobe, right, and do his his thing, right. And what we're saying is, you're going to have a different preacher every week. Sometimes it's going to be Precious Green, and she's going to bring the fire better than I could, in a different perspective. But and some days it's going to be, you know, so and so, fill in the blank. But so renegotiating that cultural change can be the difficulty in it, but. Two things. I'm going to shut up after I say this.
No, you're good.
Fresh expressions are for people that don't go to church. Right. The whole goal of it is not to go back and like bait and switch and extract people back to the compound. The motivation, it's Eucharistic. So the body of Christ is to be blessed, broken, given to the world, no strings attached. There are people in our community that don't know that they're beloved and probably never will in the way that we do church. And that's why we do fresh expressions. But as you do it long enough, people you connect with in the fresh expressions, and I bet you got some stories on this, they start to go, wait, you're a Christian? I think I'll come check out what's happening on Sunday morning. Then what kind of environment do we invite them into? And we have to adapt to that, right? So the whole church has to kind of, it can't just be the emerging adapted to the inherited. It has to be a symbiotic relationship, is like the energy and the life is flowing both ways. Now, this raises larger questions for our denomination right now, which we can get into if you want to, but that's how I think it has to work. Or the fresh expression just becomes like a silo thing and the inherited thing over here. Right. And it's a full-on lay empowerment model, like lay people doing everything that you would essentially think of as a pastoral responsibility. But the early Methodist movement, again, was a lay empowerment movement.
Yeah. I think the 50-50 rule is real important. It's something that's so important for us here at the Center for Multiplication at the Horizon Texas Conference that we try to model that we want to have 50% of our stuff outside. We don't want to just be in this office all the time. So we have one person on our staff that her job is just to try to hold us accountable to like, hey, we need to be out there in the wild, you know, in the coffee shop or visiting, you know, our church starts or whatever. But we need to try to model that because we believe that it's such an important thing that you don't we don't have pastors and people in churches to spend 100% of their time inside the established church.
Right.
We want them to be spending at least 50% of their time out there in the community and listening and praying and loving and all of that. And that's a hard battle in local churches. I mean,
You said transformation comes at the pace of trust, right? Like all of this happens.
Yeah.
And coming into St. Mark's where you're at, it sounds like there were a couple of advantages that worked in your favor, right?
Big time.
Folks who've known you since you were this big, quite literally, right?
Yeah.
One of my questions has been, if you've got 8 kind of strong people at St. Mark's when you get there, right? My experience in churches that find themselves more on the framework of we're struggling and we long for a new future and a different way forward. There's more openness to renegotiate that social contract. There's more willingness to say, let's try in the name of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Where our churches that find themselves more in a place of comfort or steadiness or even thriving, sometimes it's harder to find that willingness to renegotiate the social contract. Does that make sense? To move out of that kind of, well, this is working, why would we change it?
Yeah.
Where if it doesn't feel like it's working, air quotes, there's more hope and more willingness to say, what can't hurt? Why not? Right?
That's right.
All we're asking for is, 3 months worth of cooking meals. And for me personally, that's only 3 meals because we got 4 couples on rotation, right?
That's right.
That freedom there. So how have y'all experienced that part of the dynamic with the inherited church and looking at this?
Michael touched on it. He used a word that I think is really important. They started an experiment. And I think that is one of the safest words that we can use in an established congregation. It's like, hey, we're not going to change this. We're not going to blow this up. We're not going to do this. But, okay, here's the deal. We're going to start an experiment, and it's going to run for X weeks or X months, and we're going to try this dinner church or we're going to try this new thing. And then at the end of that X months, we're going to come back and we're going to reevaluate. And if it failed, we're going to celebrate the failure because we tried. We went out and we tried something new, tried to do the stuff that was printed in red. But if it doesn't fail, that's where we begin to gain that trust. Because if we just go in and say, hey, we're going to change this, they're going to be like, but hey, we're going to do the experiment, and then we bring them back in together and we say, hey, what do you think about that? And then all of a sudden the people in the established church, they're going to be going, hey, man, that was pretty cool. Did you see that? We got 6 people from the middle school to come to our, our teachers' banquet or whatever. I think that's a big key in helping bring these new things into these new congregations. Just using the terminology experiment. I don't know.
Yeah, it's iterative and experimental, and let's just try this for a while because the anxiety, the scarcity mentality that's in a lot of congregations, trying to start something new can feel really overwhelming. We can't even keep up with the stuff we're trying to do, and then you're asking us to do more. So that's as a way to navigate that. I do want to say, so that's St. Mark's. The church where we started 12 Fresh Expressions and that became kind of a national hub where people have come from all over to kind of visit as a Wildwood, that was a whole different story. That was fighting, struggle for 12 years.
Okay.
And that was a group of people who at some point actually had a meeting with me and said, we don't want you to be our pastor anymore. And my district superintendent, who's now a bishop, Sue Hopper and Johnson in Virginia, had to come in and give this congregation a whooping and say, this is the way it's going to be. But so I think the key thing that I would say is different. And there was a lot of racism and segregation and just history and Wildwood, and we were doing a lot of interracial, anti-racism kind of work, and it was uncomfortable for people. And so they ultimately left, and they took their checkbooks with them. But that actually made space for what did ultimately become Wildwood. But I think the key with that is the gift of desperation. In the recovery community, you were talking about this last week's podcast episode, that desperation can be that thing that pushes us to down a deep, dark hole. Or it can be that thing that becomes an accelerant for change, where we can say, this isn't working. But if you have congregations and it's working and you think, oh, everything's great, it's harder for a mid or larger congregation to see the value of Fresh Expressions. Even though I was talking to a mega church Methodist pastor and he was sharing this vision at this big conference, and I said, it's great, this multi-site thing that you have. I said, if you thought about Fresh Expressions, you could have 300 micro churches
Yeah.
the size of your church all over the city. But because the commitment there was more like, we have these big, beautiful spaces we've built, we need to get people into them. There's some pushback against that idea. But if you had one staff person, like a little bit dedicated to Fresh Expressions, or one little team, you actually are getting ahead of, because every church has a life cycle and you start a downward slope. Every church is going to get there at some point if you only do the inherited thing, right?
Right.
So you could get ahead of that with resourcing teams to start doing Fresh Expressions now. But to help people understand that you need to do that now 10, 20 years before they really start to say
Before they
things
feel
like,
the desperation.
like maybe we should do something different. That's at St. Mark's, there was no question. We need to do something different, right?
Yeah.
Because our conference wants to close us. So we're going to do something because we haven't paid apportionments or ministry protection in 8 years. So what are we going to do? And the last thing I got to say about this congregation is they made a choice that ultimately saved their lives, but it wouldn't look that way because we have converted our church into a sober housing program called Open Arms Village. So we house 32 men in our building that live there as residents. And there was a lot of, even with these people that I know and love, and for I think know and love me and trust in me at least to a degree, they were like, this, I don't know. I'm going to go to church on Sunday morning. A dude's going to be taking a shower. I was like, yes. But they made the decision to do that. And we created a 501(c) and we get funding, grants, federal funding, which now that funds the whole ministry of the church. And we have a counseling center that pays us rent, and we converted the parsonage into a step-up house, and all that brings in money. Because the other question that people get to when you're on the further down in that church life cycle slope is, how are we going to fund all this? And can we sustain doing this? Like, we can't even pay the price of being Methodist, right? And so then we have to get really creative around how we fund things, be entrepreneurial. What are we doing with our spaces? Maybe we don't need to have paid staff. Like, our whole church is lay volunteers, and even my wife and I, we are blessed to have employment outside the church, so we don't really need the church to pay us, so we can do things creative. But churches really have to start thinking about those things, because just being sustained by plate donations, if we read the writing on the wall and the way things are shifting the religious landscape in the United States, that's not going to be sustainable for a lot of churches. So this creativity with Fresh Expressions also has to call us to do different things for how we generate income and how
Well, we got to have, the stool's got to have more than one leg on it, right?
That's right. Yes.
And historically, we've
metaphor.
fallen into the trap of, a good way to get appointed higher in the Methodist system is to be good at running a Jesus-centric, membership-based small business.
Yes.
Right? And that can be church, and it often is church, right? But it doesn't have to be church, right? And so how do we keep the church part and but be open to be flexible on the membership-based small business piece of it, right? Keep the Jesus-centric, but be willing to be flexible on the other is a thing that, as you said, desperation can give us the gift of freedom in sometimes in places. I am really curious to see. Our church is a mid-sized church. We run just shy of 300 most weeks. We've been in a place of recovery over the last 4 years, right? Kind of coming out of COVID, we were under 2. We've made it back to nearly 3. Finances have kind of made a similar move from crisis to stable, not good, but stable, right?
Nice.
But I know, and we all know, that plateau turns into decline really quickly in the life cycle of the church. And if we're not always looking for where is the next new thing, where is the next new community that God is inviting us to be committed to and connected to, what's that next new creative way of doing what we do in service of Christ and neighbor, we're going to get stuck.
Yes.
And stuck leads to this, right? Stuck's not up and to the right. Stuck is down and to the left, which will find our way to that desperation. And then all of a sudden, there may be more freedom or maybe not, right? I am really curious over the next 10 years to see those conversations you're having with denominational leaders at the giant churches, at the large churches, at the mid-sized churches, to say, how can these communities get ahead, right? Just as you named in the last episode that the UK gives us a window 25 years into our future on the secularization or the getting beyond Christendom of the church. Our places that are experiencing some desperation may give those that aren't a 25-year window into this is coming, right? Because if we look at our demographics, right, what was your language for your not well-seasoned
Chronologically mature.
Chronologically mature. A lot of our churches are chronologically mature, right?
Yes.
We're gray-headed or bald-headed. That's part of who we are. And while it may not feel like we've got to be open to reinvention today, if we are, it creates even more profound possibility for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's something that God, we just have to be intentional about it, right?
Yeah.
It's just something that I was glancing over here and I saw this Wesley Foundation mug from Tarleton Wesley, and I served at Wesley Foundation. I served at the University of Kentucky, and then I was also at Texas Tech University for about 15 years at
You
the
had
Wesley
to squeeze that in, didn't you?
I
You
did.
Had to get the Texas
well, you
Tech.
had to put your Florida mug up there. I'm just going to sit here like this now.
Oh man!
But there was one thing
Hit me
about
on
being
that.
at a Wesley Foundation that I almost wish every pastor had to serve a year at a Wesley Foundation, because at a Wesley Foundation, you're essentially starting a new church every year.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you won't have the leaders to help lead in 2 years. So I think Wesley Foundation directors, all they do are fresh expressions. I mean, it's every year. It's like, who's on my leadership team? What do they love to do? Oh, he likes to ride bicycles. He likes to do rock climbing. And you just absorb these people and empower them to go out and start a rock climbing club or a bicycle club. And in the middle of it, have a little devotion, invite them to a Bible study or a band or, all of that. And it just became such a part of who I was. I was like that before I went to, I've always had this, starting fantasy football leagues or softball teams with outreach intention, but there's something that we just have to, evangelism, fresh expressions, new expressions, it has to just be, it just has to be something that we're just intentional about. Because if not, when you get to the life cycles, but if we're, think about it, if you're always starting new stuff, if you're always looking for people of peace, if you're always doing that, and that's just part of your DNA of your church, the church will look different, but you're never really going to experience it. It just is going to be in different.
It's like a roller coaster.
It's just gonna look different, and the people are gonna be at different places and stuff. And I just somatics. We've been talking about fresh expressions the whole time. In the Horizon Texas Conference, we call it new expressions, because when the three legacy conferences came together, North Texas was doing new places, new faces, new spaces. Central Texas and Northwest Texas, we were doing fresh expressions. So when I put a team together last year to come up with a name, we kind of compromised between the three conferences, and we decided, well, we're going to do new expressions. So it's just semantics.
So if folks hear that language going forward, that's...
So I just want, when people go to the website and looking for grants and stuff that we have, it's not going to be under fresh expressions. It's going to be under new expressions. So that kind of dawned on me a second ago. I was like, we've been using the historical language since 2003 or whatever it was.
That's actually really good language. We're at Perkins, we're putting together, trying to reproduce all the fresh expressions resources in Spanish. I think I mentioned in the earlier podcast about the base ecclesial communities of Latin America, lots of synergy there with that. But the word fresh doesn't actually translate in Spanish the way we would want it to.
Yeah.
So I think nueva expresiones is actually more sensitive to like the Hispanic language of what we're trying to communicate. So you're ahead of the game.
All right. Well, I'll say we did that intentionally.
Yeah, amen.
You need to know Al has personally trademarked that, and so there will be a royalty attached. No. But it is a season where new beginnings, fresh beginnings, are critically important. And frankly, one of the gifts of coming out of the season we've come out of as a denomination, right? A season of disaffiliation and struggle. Everybody who's United Methodist today is here on purpose, right? Yep. We are clear-eyed, warm-hearted, and ready to do a new thing for Jesus. And so in some ways, as an institution, we may have experienced some of that desperation that sets us free, right? That you named a little bit earlier. And so my prayer for all of us is that we might be open to the new expressions that God is inviting us into, that helps us connect deeply to the neighborhood that we are planted in, the neighborhood that we love, the neighborhood that Christ loves and is at work in the midst of, if we can just go be open to it and see him alive and at work in the midst of it all.
I just wanted to tell one story about the symbiotic part of it. Like I mentioned earlier that we, as a Center for Multiplication, we try to have meetings out in coffee shops or at local churches just to be out there and just to spend 50% of our time out meeting people and telling our story and stuff like that. And so we had one of our staff meetings at a local church, and we just called them and said, hey, can we have our meeting there? We want to hear your story and hear what's going on, and we want to meet your staff, pray for you, and just kind of do stuff like that. So we're in there, we have our meeting and stuff, and then the pastor or the associate pastor comes up and is telling us the story that happened this weekend about what they were so excited about. And I can't remember the church, or I would give it a plug right now, but they had a fresh expression that was an outreach to the local community, kind of meet the needs, mercy-driven kind of thing, where they would provide food or clothing. It's outreach ministry where they had a little bit of disciple tied into it. And this church staff was so fired up because this was a Monday meeting. And on the day before, on Sunday, 2 people from that outreach got baptized at their local congregation. And it was the first adult baptism that they had had in a couple years. And they were... that the staff was so fired up about the fact that these 2 individuals got baptized in their church, and it was because of this outreach, fresh expression that was going on. And I just remember going back in our meeting after that little meeting with the staff, and I looked at the people on the center and I was like, that's what we wanted. We want people to go outside the walls, meet people. And then it brings just the life and the energy that staff was just sharing about the fact that they baptized these 2 not elderly, probably in their 40s or 50s, right? They're our age, or our age.
We're getting there.
Yeah, but I don't know. So that's when I talk about the symbiotic and how it's all real. Those stories. I mean, for a congregation that hasn't baptized an adult in years, and then all of a sudden you get to, because that the spirit in you and the spirit in me, it rings truth together. I mean, that's good stuff, right? And so I don't know. That's kind of.
Let me piggyback on that a little bit.
Okay.
So the synergy that happens now, like at St. Mark's. So we do this church in a rehab called Higher Power Hour. We go in Monday nights to an inpatient rehab facility. We've been doing that for 3 years. Lots of professions of faith, baptism will come out of that, obviously. But we started to really build a relationship with the center and the director where we meet there, Megan Huff. And they now bus the residents of the rehab to church on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And my people are always saying, Pastor, we just want to see our church full again. You know, it's cool that we're doing all this stuff. I still get the question, when are these people going to come to real church? Right?
Right.
No matter how much I tell them they've been baptized, we're taking communion, we're studying scripture, we're worshiping Jesus.
Yeah.
They're like, when are they going?
We've been framed by butts and bucks, like you talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Butts and seats, bucks and plates. Yeah, that's the...
I'd love to get to that, too, if we can in this conversation, because I think it's the great challenge with this before us as a denomination. But now, so they're like, we want to see our church full again. I said, I want to see our church full again, too. But do you want to see it full of the people who live in this neighborhood just outside the walls? Or do you want to see it full of your friends from the 1950s? Right?
Yeah.
So now, fresh worship, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock recovery church, 11 o'clock vintage worship. Fresh worship is all those people we got connected with in Fresh Expressions. And they're like, okay, if you're a Christian, you don't suck as bad as I thought that you would. What do we do on Sunday mornings? We want to check that out. So we got dogs running around because we do a dog park church. And they're like, can I bring my dog? And we're like, yes, I guess, because like that's our thing. Okay. Jordan and Psalm. Jordan is a rapper and Psalm is a vocalist. We first connected with them in Higher Power Hour. So one guy would bang on the table and make a beat, and Jordan would rap over that. They would do these original songs every week. Because in that community, we asked people to bring their gifts, their songs, their poetry, their art that they create, and Psalm would sing over that. So now on Sunday mornings, that's part of our worship experience. Jordan will do a rap, Psalm will sing some stuff. We do coffee toast and dance breaks, and we have families together around tables. We have breakfast. We do all kind of crazy stuff. So that's fresh worship. It's not necessarily what my people had in mind, like we want to see our church full again, but it's what the community actually looks like. So as we continue to do this ecology over time, right, that interaction happens, that synergy starts to happen. The inherited church looks totally different than it used to, and in unexpected ways, like we're just kind of following the Spirit. These things are emerging in real time. So adapting to that experimental attitude is really important in that. But I do think if y'all want to get into this, that's exactly, some people consider the church in the UK, the Fresh Expression movement, a failure because we never changed the metrics around it. So if you try to fit this way of being church through the sausage maker of what George Ritzer calls McDonaldization, efficiency, rationality, control, this will not make sense in that metric framework. It's not about butts and bucks. It's not about making your church full again. It's not the Save the Denomination plan. But can we get ahead of that and adapt our metrics to actually ask different questions, like what does vitality actually look like in 2025? Not what it historically looked like in a Christendom way. And are there ways to build metric frameworks around things like fresh expressions so that they can live together and we celebrate and validate both? You got a big church with lots of people coming and give lots of money. Thanks be to God. That's amazing. But can we get some validation and some metric support around, you got 12 people that meet in the fantasy football league and 2 have been baptized and now you're doing funeral for 2 of them. How can we celebrate that too and see that as success as well?
I've typically been reasonably good at doing the Jesus-centric membership-based small business things, right? My churches tend to have grown over time. Now, I'm a failed church planter. I messed that up in a really profound way. It didn't work. But there's nothing magical about butts and bucks, though, right? They are a imperfect expression of trying to track vitality in the Christendom metric, right? They don't perfectly, they track who is present, not who is transformed. Does that make sense? And so I recognize that they're a necessary evil. I recognize that, we even use them to kind of track trends within our local church. Like, are things moving in the direction we hope to? Are they signals of vitality and something's working, that we're connecting and it's helping things? But there's nothing magical to them, right? And so why can't we reimagine a set of metrics that validate and honor the breadth of the expression of church that shows up in our midst, right? Because when people feel seen and heard and validated, they do better work, right? They're more invested in what they do. Where if I look at my fantasy football league as my church of 12 and go, it's not a church of 144 or it's not a church of 1,200, then all of a sudden is your heart as invested in the 12 as you might have been otherwise. But Jesus had 12, right? And look what happened with that, right? And so reframing, I think it's a really powerful and important conversation. I believe metrics matter, but I also believe that the ones we have are imperfect, and we should recognize that they tell us something, but they don't tell us everything, right? Yes. They're a way to help us understand. And I would be curious, as somebody who does think that metrics kind of matter, what have you found as, let's just say, markers of vitality along the way within
what a great
this
question.
Expressions of?
I think you've done some work on this, haven't you?
Yeah, it's almost like you couldn't have known that we were having a conversation about this, but that really is the work I'm doing at the University of Florida.
Okay.
I see it as a
Is the second doctorate?
Yeah.
Okay.
As the gift that I can give to my denomination is try to figure this out. But metrics are not neutral. So there's a theorist named Sally Mary Engel who wrote a book called a bunch of research, our peer-reviewed articles on measuring the world. and looking at how kind of the managerial age metric assumptions are baked into the church. So we didn't just come up with those metrics. Those metrics come from like business McDonaldization kind of ideas that we've like imported into the church, right? So you won't find those kind of measurements like in the New Testament, for example. So there's qualitative and quantitative measurements and things. So, but with Fresh Expressions, the metric framework is built into the Loving First journey itself. So if you thought about that listening, loving, building relationship, sharing Jesus, church, repeat, or multiply, what if we thought about that? I've done a lot of focus groups with United Methodist developers and harvested all this qualitative data. By the way, nobody in any of the 9 focus groups have ever said the metrics we have are great and they actually measure vitality.
Right.
None of them said
we're
it.
reasonably self-aware.
We're aware of that, right? So this is not revelatory in that way. But then I gave them as part of those focus groups. So imagine, first of all, what is your definition of vitality? And they all weighed in on that. And it was nothing that we currently measure. And then I said, what were the metrics that you would create if you could?
Yeah.
And so I harvested all that focus group data. So a lot of our metrics are surveillance metrics. You know, they say we feel like we're being surveilled. Local churches feel like we got to give these reports at the end of the year. We don't really know what they do with the data, if it's used in any kind of significant way, but we know we got to fill out our reports. But what if we could have learning metrics that were not just about us trying to harvest the data and, quantify the butts and bucks, but metrics that actually help churches in the process of doing mission. And because they're not neutral, why things like Fresh Expressions get shut down and we get those questions like, when are they going to come to real church, is because they're being programmed by those metrics to certain behaviors. Because if you do these behaviors, that's what you're going to be evaluated on at the end of the day. One of the pastors in one of the focus groups said, preachers inflate their numbers all the time. It's like those numbers are not accurate because there's a bunch of pastor inflation. And then a layperson, the wisdom always comes from the lady, said, well, why do we have metrics that make preachers feel like they need to lie about their numbers? That was a profound moment, right?
Yeah.
So learning metrics could be, we do something, we experiment, what do we learn from it? We get feedback. So what I'm working on is called the LFAT, the Loving First Assessment Tool. And it gives you some qualitative and quantitative metrics in each of those phases of the Loving First journey.
Okay.
So how are we really listening to our community? How are we empowering teams to listen? How are we really loving people, no strings attached? What are different people in our groups who feel confident to share a Jesus story or facilitate a group, or how many people have prayed for the first time, or so then we could get that data for us as conferences and as churches, which would be really helpful, right? But then it also helps the practitioners who are doing it, like, oh, I see that we're kind of in the loving first, we're in the loving stage of this, but how do we move into like the exploring discipleship, sharing Jesus stage?
Yeah.
So we could have actually paradigms that help us move along that journey and measure that. So that's what I'm working on, and I think if our denomination doesn't figure that piece out, like, let's go back to OG Methodism for a minute.
Sure.
What happened with it?
It
was a renewal movement, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the 20th century came, and we became an institutional movement, right? And we built systems and structures and buildings, and
we became a bureaucracy, with Max Weber says as an iron cage. But then we also split off and became a denomination, which I don't think was the heart and the intent ever of the Wesleyan movement. It was to renew the thing that was there. So I wonder sometimes, because this is clearly the Fresh Expressions, unlike emergent church and other movements that have come across history, Fresh Expressions is not trying to burn down the inherited or move away from it in any way. We're saying both are equally beautiful and valid in a blended ecology. And if we do this, we're going to see renewal in the inherited systems too. So are we right now in a moment where we have a movement of the Holy Spirit that's currently, partially, it's an ecumenical movement, but it's definitely in the sandbox of Methodism, right? And are we at a moment that we can learn from that and try to harness it and be a part of it, not domesticate it or try to overly bureaucratize it, but we may be in a moment right now where those things can learn to live together, and we could have I think the Wesleys were trying to accomplish in the beginning anyway, which was the renewal of the Church of Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah.
To renew the nation and the church, to reform the nation and to renew the church. So, yeah.
Okay. I really do pray, and I'm looking forward to reading that LFAT assessment, because I think it is, there have been moments where we have moved, we turn in all our numbers. We turn in all our numbers.
We do.
We track them.
I do my reports too, Bishop.
At the local level, we've been looking at, we can't control outcomes, but we can control our inputs, right? And so how are we making intentional choices in how we're forming the spaces we're doing? How are we listening well to the community? Like, we control what we can control, and we're going to trust that God will, if God inspired it, God will work in it, right? And that will lead to some numeric outcome, good, bad, or indifferent, right? But how do we control our inputs and focus on our inputs rather than being so outcome-centric?
Yes.
But
I was just taking a deep breath.
Okay.
I thought you were about to jump in.
We've had a fantastic conversation today.
Yes.
As you said when we were getting started, this could go on for hours and hours. If folks want to continue a part of this conversation, Michael, I know in addition to being Reverend Doctor, or soon to be second doctor, you're well published in a number of different places and spaces. If folks wanted to kind of take this conversation to their own kind of journey of growth or to their local church, what are some resources that they could access that would be helpful to them?
Absolutely. I've written a bunch of books, like 18 of them that no one buys. So when I get my royalty checks, I'll bought one. I always tell my wife, yay, the royalty check came. We can go biggie size, take the kids out. I have a website, michaeladambeck.com, where kind of just lists all the different things in one central location, books, resources, trainings. I would encourage people to lean into Fresh Expressions United Methodists, which is our denominational coming through Path 1 and Discipleship Ministries. We have free training, teaching, resources out there on that. But there's a lot of great books. I'm really excited for what's happening at Perkins. We have a Fresh Expression House of Studies. So this has always been another thing that, how are we training people theologically? Because I don't know if you guys had the same experience, but when I got out of seminary, I was like, seminary didn't prepare me for what I need to do and know to be a missionary in my context. So that, lean into that. There's non-degree certifications, and there's master's tracks and whole doctorates that you can get in Fresh Expressions now.
But if you go to his website, he sends out a weekly newsletter?
Oh, yeah, the Substack, Passional Church Substack.
Yeah, and they're great. So that's another way. And one of his colleagues, Luke Edwards, has a really good website called thelisteningchurch.com, which would be good. So
absolutely.
But yeah, just go to his website and look around and click on links.
We bought Luke's deck of cards for our local church, and our church council is going to work through it over the coming year.
Very practical
just
stuff.
Cultivating that practice, just working the muscle, right, of listening well to the neighborhood around us.
Oh, yeah.
That's good.
And being connected there.
There's some hard cards in there, just to let you know. So.
Okay, well, we haven't gotten too deep into it yet, so but we look forward to the challenge that is there. Al, I know we've got a number of resources and opportunities coming at the conference level over the course of this year that folks might want to be aware of. Just kind of save a date for.
The main thing is if you're wanting to start one of these, we can do a micro grant, and you can apply through that, and our team will look at it and just got some questions in there, qualifying questions on who's going to do it, what, and stuff like that. But so there's a $500 micro grant, and if you get something started and it gets going and gets some traction, you need some more help, we have another $2,500 matching grant for that. We got a team of multipliers that are going to be working with those people that are doing the new expressions to help them out. And then in July, after annual conference, we're going to be doing another round of multiplication master classes, and these ones are going to be focusing primarily on new expressions. But
since you coined that new expressions term, do you get like a royalty or a kickback on everyone that someone starts?
No, I don't.
You get one of those pennies that they're phasing out.
Yeah,
every time.
Yeah, the pennies. Yeah. But seriously, if y'all need money to help start this, go get the micro grant. We'd love to help you out and just have conversations about it, because it's great. We have some neat stuff going on in the conference.
That's fantastic. And I love that the conference is doing that, because sometimes just that initial financial investment is the first hurdle, right? That people go, well, how are we going to fund this? 500 isn't going to take you forever, but it can get you started. And just set you free to say yes to where God is leading you next. Al, thank you so much for being here with us today and for the work you do here locally in the Rise in Texas Conference. Michael, thank you so much for everything you do, not only here at Perkins and connected, but across the denomination. You're a gift to us and a challenger of us from time to time. And I think we do our best work when we hear from the prophets of our season and prophets of our midst. So thank you for all that you're doing and the ways you're inviting us into this blended future together of new expressions or fresh expressions, however you want to coin it, because I think God is at work in this. And God is at work in all of the new ways in which God's people are seeking to do, as Bishop Sines has asked us a number of times, be good ancestors to the generations that come after us.
Yes.
How do we hand them a church that's better equipped to transform lives than the one we received? That's our challenge day by day. And I hope and pray that this conversation has been a meaningful part of our community's journey in that direction. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for making time to be on Pod Strangely Warm today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been awesome.
Thank you for taking time to be with us. We don't take for granted that an hour of YouTube is something that could be spent in a lot of different ways. It's the world's second largest search engine. And so we give you thanks that you've spent time here with us. If this conversation has been meaningful to your spirit, got you to think and pause, or makes you want to share it with somebody who's in leadership at your church, whether it's your pastor, a lay leader in your church, a community. Maybe you flashed to a person of peace in your life who said, we could start that fantasy football community of faith. We could do any number of things. Share this. Help the conversation not stop here in a room in Plano. Help it continue far beyond this place. And when we do that, God will do more than we could ever ask or imagine. And sometimes that will look at perfect success, sometimes that won't, but God will be at work in it, and we will have said yes to partnering with God, and that is a gift. So, until next time, I'm Daniel Hawkins, and this has been Pod Strangely Warm. This has been Pod Strangely Warm. If you enjoyed our conversation today, know that you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. On Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, any and all the places, we are there. So if you want to continue the good United Methodist conversation that you've been a part of today, find us, like us, rate us, review us, and share with a friend so that the good news that is happening right here in our own midst can amplify even more.
Amen.
Amen. Good
You're
stuff, guys. That was
preaching,
fun.
bro.
Yeah. I was like, that was a good close.
Yeah, man. Well, you're really good at this, so just lead me where you want me to
you're
go.
great.
And
Okay. Well,
I'll take off.
You've done this before, haven't you?
a couple times. It's-
Kind of pro level.
No.
I have a podcast, but I'm not good
I
at
just
it.
noticed your Denman Evangelism Award up there. Good job.
Holy
I didn't know. That's a big
Dustin's
deal.
an award-winning podcast producer. So,
Well, the Denman Award is a big deal, so congratulations.
I've never got it.